Oh, welcome to Science Monday, everybody. I'll tell Cy to fix the banner when we do Science Monday instead of Science Sunday. Regardless, glad you all could join us for another episode of Science Sunday on Monday evening. Hope everyone had a great weekend. We're going to be picking up a little bit where we left off with the last science series before the untimely, well, I shouldn't say untimely, but the unfortunate passing of Dr. Hawking. So, in our first round with the climate science series, we were discussing how carbon cycles, ice core dating, how it is that these things are measured, the work that's done in that facet as far as Greenland ice core samples, Antarctic ice core samples, things of that nature. And we're going to be continuing kind of along that premise today with talking about more of the long-term carbon cycles that we're able to measure and where it is that we go and actually look to make these discoveries. So I believe SciStrike had something that he wanted to share real quick in regards to that. So why don't we go ahead and let him jump in and do his thing.
All right. Hi. I'll try to be real quick, but unfortunately what we're talking about is the slow carbon cycle. So we'll see what we can do about that. Yay, slow carbon cycle. Woohoo! Anyway, the slow carbon cycle looked at from a 10,000 foot overview is where carbon goes from the atmosphere to rock, back to atmosphere at some point. There's a balance worked out, and even when something odd occurs, it does eventually return to a balance. So let's see, we got here. Got some pictures to go with this. Alrighty, let's see. All right, we mentioned carbon in the atmosphere and how it moves, how it ends up bound up in rocks. Starts with rain, which picks up atmospheric carbon and makes a weak acid, carbonic acid, and that falls to the surface. This acid dissolves rocks. We call it chemical weathering. It releases calcium, magnesium, potassium, or sodium ions. Rivers carry this off into the ocean. Once in the ocean, calcium ions combine with bicarbonate ions to form calcium carbonate. Now, in addition, we need another picture here. There we go. Ooh.
That's so pretty.
Isn't it?
Nice. Like Fibonacci. It's a Fibonacci spiral. Isn't it?
Absolutely.
That is actually a really gorgeous picture.
Isn't it? This in the modern oceans, most of the calcium carbonate is made by calcifying organisms, corals, plankton, things of that sort. And the organisms die and sink to the seafloor, and layers of that kind of get cemented together, and the carbon is stored in stone, limestone and such. Somewhere around 80% of the carbon-containing rock, that's where it comes from. The remaining 20% comes from living things that happen to tip over and die, and get embedded in mud and heat, pressure, etc., over millions of years. You end up with sedimentary rocks such as shale. Now, oh wait, I think we need a new picture. There we go. Here's a new picture. Ooh, look at that. You can tell there's some carbon going on. You can layers. Ogres have layers.
Like onions. Except onions. This is like not a stinky onion, and it's really, really hard.
We call that bedding.
Precisely. All right, now the slow cycle generally returns this carbon to the atmosphere through volcanoes. These Earth's land, as you know, sits on several moving crustal plates. Plates bump into each other. One usually will get kind of crunched beneath the other, and the rock moving along with it kind of melts under the extreme heat and pressure, and the heated rock recombines into silicate minerals, releasing carbon dioxide. And when we have a volcano eruption, it vents this gas back into the atmosphere. That is basically I left out a few details, but that is basically the slow carbon process.
Good way of putting it in a non-technical terms, too.
Indeed, and if there were any hiccups, mistakes, omissions, and errors, I have the right team here to correct me so that we don't leave people with a false impression. Now, we covered it was a slow process, right? I mean, we're talking hundreds.
Remember when we talked about the calcium carbonate in the shells and stuff of the aquatic life, and how since there's considerably less of that, that's happening. You know, the shells of these organisms. That's also part of the slow carbon process. And so, because there's less calcium carbonate, that's actually a problem now, especially for the shells, and also returning carbon back to the atmosphere because it's not so much in the ocean.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Now, before we started,
you got to stop saying "indeed" right before I say "indeed." Sidestrike.
You owe each other so many Cokes now.
Let's see. Okay. Right. For the industrial age. The ocean's venting carbon dioxide. It was pretty much in balance with the carbon being taken in from the rock weathering we talked about earlier. Unfortunately, carbon concentrations in the atmosphere are a little bit up. All right, they're a lot up. The ocean is now taking in more carbon than it can put back into the atmosphere. Anyway, point is, we're dumping carbon into the system more quickly than it can be processed, and it is difficult for the ocean to maintain the balance that it has been so good at doing in the past. In other words, once again, the planet was not expecting to be infested with people. So that's and that's it. We have tipped the scale, basically. Andy,
the one thing that I'd always try and think of this being an amateur astronomer, this, that, and the other, having a geologist for a father, sitting down and considering this a slow cycle when our planet's only been around for a little less than a third of the existence of the universe itself. I don't think it's a very slow process. I think we just don't get to stick around long enough.
Well, it's slow compared to a human lifespan, but us geologists have a different concept of time than most people do. So,
indeed, and that definitely got ingrained in me growing up, and it's like, oh, okay, so I'm walking around on something that's been it's been out of the seafloor, and these are okay. That's a billion-year-old shell that I just picked up. That's cool, no biggie. That's the way that the Rockies are.
Here's a volcano, anyway. Just that. I failed to switch. Here's a volcano. All right.
That's okay.
Should have shown the ones pictures from Mount St. Helens, 1980.
That, yes, if I had some handy, I definitely would have thrown them up.
Indeed, oh man, I should have. Had I have known that you were going to be getting into that particular portion, I would have scanned in some of the slides. I have probably 250 slides from when my dad was up there. Mount St. Helens erupted, and he was doing work around the area with some of his volcanologist buddies at the survey. So there's some scary and spectacular images.
Okay.
Please
note to
tell
self.
me that one. Please tell me that somebody that was a volcanologist actually was named Spock. Please. That would have been awesome.
It would have been. But
my knowledge, no one there was, but they're...
Okay.
To give you a little pat on the back, Steve, there was a Steve that was a part of his team from the survey that happened to be there at the time.
There's always Steves and herds of geologists for some reason. I don't know why. Always there.
You're a damn,
it happens.
Damn sciencey bunch, you Steves are. But Andy, it sounds like you've suggested a topic for an entire future episode with what you described there.
I probably have, inadvertently.
That sounds like a damn good idea. All right. Very good.
We'll have to take note of that, actually. Write that down real fast.
Okay, I'm pretending to write it down, which means one of you have to...
I'm writing it down.
Okay,
I actually
good.
just had a brilliant idea, too, but I'll message you all when this is over.
Okay.
Oh, got it now.
That works. Okay, so I suppose with Sai's awesome little description there of how the slow carbon cycle is intended to function and has functioned in the past and is no longer able to keep up right now, I suppose it's about that time that I touch on one of the areas that we actually get the ability to measure this outside of ice cores, because while ice cores do help us get back 50,000 or so years into history, we need a larger sampling base. We need more information than just 50,000 years. It's just not enough. So if you're looking to gain information about what climate was like, say 100,000 years ago, and even more than 100,000 years ago, there's a very obvious place that you look, and that is part of the slow carbon cycle. And as Sci-Strike had mentioned, that formation of carbonic acid due to rain mixing with carbon, and this gets a little bit more tricky because we're going to start talking about cave systems, and of course when water leaches through the ground, it can absorb carbon dioxide from the air, but it's also absorbing carbon from the ground itself and from plant matter. So there's a myriad of isotopes. Well, I shouldn't say a myriad. There's generally 3 isotopes of carbon that are looked at in this information. And one of the best places, and in my opinion, one of the coolest places that's all over planet Earth, is cave systems. So when you start getting into cave systems, of course, there might have already been a hollow underground. Maybe the hollow was formed by a volcanic tunnel. There's too many ways of cave formation to get into that. So as that carbonic acid eats away at the limestone and it makes its way into a cave or produces a cave entirely on its own, then we start having the formation of stalactites and stalagmites. And during this process, of course, that carbonic acid becomes part of the calcium buildup that is those rocks. So these calcium-rich stalactites and stalagmites, and the much cooler ones, in my opinion, just because they look cooler, soda straws and bacon strips, actually. I know it's I don't know who in the world got to name these things, but if you go caving or if you've been interested in taking a look at going caving, bacon strips and soda straws are some of the coolest and most delicate structures that you'll come across. They're absolutely gorgeous. And in sampling these, we're able to measure both the various oxygen isotopes and the various calcium isotopes. And we get a very long history of the carbon cycles that have been going on. And with the stalactites and stalagmites, it's very similar to how when you cut a tree down, you can take a look at the growth rings. Well, stalactites and stalagmites have the same growth rings. You just have to slice them vertically instead of horizontally. I'm sure you could get some ring action from a horizontal slice, but you're not going to get the whole story. And seeing as how, again, this is not my particular field, did find a couple of decent shorts that cover it in hopefully a decent amount of detail that everyone gets to learn something new. So if you want to play those, Sai.
Sounds good to me. All right, now in the I'm not sure which one.
I don't think it matters which one goes first.
All right, very good. That's the answer I was looking for. Here we go. We'll start with climate change is locked in rocks. Here we go.
As they slowly drip onto cave floors, the mineral-laden drops of water that form stalagmites create an archive of the changing climate outside the cave. These stalagmites, from Al-Kurd, a cave in north-central Iran, contain a record of precipitation in the Middle East from 70,000 to 130,000 years ago. Researchers at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School took samples from different points along the stalagmites and analyzed the oxygen isotopes. That helped them reconstruct the history of rainfall in the region over time. Cycles of wet and dry periods corresponded to the Earth's angle to the sun and the amount of solar energy it received. Sevag Matarian spoke to us via Skype.
So as the Earth moved closer and further away from the sun in thousands of year time periods, it would receive more energy, and this energy would actually be able to evaporate water in the Mediterranean Sea, and then it's that water that would eventually feed into the region of the Middle East as rainfall. And so we saw precisely this kind of record in the stalagmites that we measured.
This pattern, from maximum solar energy to today's minimum and back, repeated roughly every 20,000 years and was a worldwide phenomenon.
We actually compared directly our own findings with that of the North Greenland Ice Core Project, which is one of the very famous ice cores from Greenland, as well as a deep sea sediment record from the Atlantic, which looked at little microorganisms that lived in the sediment and also looked at, again, the same kind of oxygen isotopes in there. And what we found was that we see the same exact record recorded in all of these different mediums in vastly different regions of the world.
And while it might seem that more solar energy would create a warmer, wetter world, Matarian explains there's a difference between energy from outside the planet and heat-trapping gases from the surface.
It's a different mechanism of heating that's not able to actually warm up any of the water enough to evaporate it in a way to actually cause beneficial precipitation to the region.
The research, published in Quaternary Science Reviews, predicts a dry spell likely to continue for the next 10,000 years. I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News, Washington.
Oh, there we go.
So there's that one, and this... Obviously, there's more information going on than just what you can pop into a couple-minute video quick, but... Mel, you have that look like you have something to say.
Oh, I don't. I was just watching the video.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a geologist at all.
I have one
so
thing
this
to
is fascinating.
say. Just so everyone knows, it's pronounced quaternary, not quaternary.
Okay.
Quaternary journal, okay.
Quaternary, okay.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
I don't blame
right.
you. Having something pronounced incorrectly when you know that it's incorrect can definitely drive you up the wall.
Okay, very good. Okay, duly noted. Quaternary. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
There were, when the four of us were first discussing this show, there was actually a couple articles that, I shouldn't say articles, but papers that I had found through Google Scholar that cover the process much more in depth. Obviously, they are actual scientific papers from journals. If anyone's interested in a very good read, it's a quick and easy Google search, and the information will bury you for weeks. But I absolutely suggest it. There's a lot of great reading out there about how all of this science is done. It gets more into even taking core samples from, dying coral reefs, and yeah, there's a plethora of information out there that you will just read for weeks if you're into that sort of thing. Oh.
Have we got another video coming? Because I'm excited about videos. It's like, they're awesome.
Right, I think we're about to head to Borneo for a minute or two.
We are, in fact. And so you're saying I after my stellar performance at the intro, just about anything is entertaining. All right. We're off to Borneo. Here we go.
All right.
The tropical Pacific is a very important part of the global climate system. It is home to the El Niño Southern Oscillation, which is a climate phenomenon where sea surface temperatures increase. It actually causes a reorganization of the global climate atmospheric circulation. And that impacts temperatures and most notably rainfall patterns in many, many areas of the globe. My graduate student, Stacy Carolyn, was the lead author on the manuscript and generated all of the data that go into building the Borneo stalagmite records. Our fieldwork involves traveling to Borneo into the middle of the rainforest where there is a World Heritage Site, so designated for the caves that are there. And we seek to sample the stalagmites, which are growing from the ground up, and they grow extremely slowly. And as they grow, they record changes in rainfall chemistry. For this study, collected fallen stalagmites that have been knocked over by various processes, humans or natural, and we bring those back to the lab to generate our climate records. Here at Georgia Tech, we have a mass spectrometer that we use, and we drill every 1 millimeter powders for analysis on the mass spec. So that's the parameter that we are using to track back changes in precipitation amount back into the distant past, in this case 100,000 years. Understanding how this system responded to different climate changes in the past, we hope will inform what might happen in the future and what role it might play in future climate changes that are very important for society to understand.
Cool.
Indeed.
So, like I say, a little bit of a shorter one, and but it still gets the point across as to how research is being done in certain facets and all over the globe. In fact, from Borneo to New Mexico, Kentucky, Greenland, Antarctica, Iran, China, the work is taking place across the globe. This isn't one person somewhere sat down and decided, I'm going to try and create a spiel that hopefully people will like so that they could make money off of selling solar panels.
Well, that's a good thing to having a more generally globally open society, is that there is that corroboration you didn't get like during the Cold War.
Indeed, having that ability to work. The way I've always looked at the world of science is that we're curious people and we're trying to learn something amazing. I don't think that there's a lot of political persuasion when it comes to a scientist wanting to learn and discover. I don't believe that that's so much in existence as there is with many other aspects of our existence. And when you do have that ability to, okay, I'm going to read this paper from this Australian group because I have that ability, and we can work together, and that starts us down a little bit of another realm where not only do we get to work across the globe much more regularly these days and age, but the information coming in is able to be checked and rechecked in multiple environments, in multiple scenarios by a wealth of scientists that I wish was 10 times more than it is, but maybe someday we'll figure out a means of education that allows people a greater ability to move into fields of science as opposed to other ends of life. But anywho, throughout all of that, it also opens up the door for I don't know if it's necessarily a larger amount of peer review, or if it's potentially a new style of peer review where you're not dealing with a nation trying to make a statement to another nation. You are just dealing with, this is the raw science, this is the information, and when we get that information in and it's time to present a paper to your peers, that information is going to be looked at, and it's not just going to be looked at by people that maybe think that you're right, or maybe it's going to be people that have done other research in other areas where you find collaborating evidence. So moving into that kind of peer review area, I'm I'm going to go ahead and toss things over to scientists Mel and Stephen. As in our previous conversations, you guys have both recently had some peer review work done, and I would love to hear about the process from your perspectives.
You want to go first, Stephen, since it's about geology, and then I can cover like the non-geology.
You go. Actually, you go first because I saw your video earlier, and you did a very detailed, in-depth, good video. And then I figure you could go through it, take your 2 cents, and then I'll go through mine maybe, and then point out like the kind of hurdles, personal experience type of thing with it.
Okay.
That makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. What I'll do is I'll just kind of use some of the slides that I used before. So you'll see like little orange squares up in the corner. If you see those, that's usually where my face goes on my own show. But, them's the breaks sometimes. So I guess I'll go ahead and share what I got. Here we go. Hopefully you guys can see. Okay.
Whoop, hold off a second. Have to do a little bit of adjustment so that folks can see.
It's Beaker.
Everything.
Okay.
Hold up. Just kidding.
Okay. I will hold up.
It's cutting
the
off
bank.
It's cutting off at the bottom. I'm just fixing that so that it's all as it ought to be. So I do not want to. Okay. There we go. Look at that. That's just a thing. Okay. And on that note, back to you, young lady.
Thank you. If you happen to see any questions, because I've got my screen is full of notes and stuff. So if you happen to see any questions, holler them at me in the chat.
I'll keep an eye on the chat for you.
Okay, so this I won't spend a whole lot of time going through this because I did a shorter version. If you're not interested in a lot of the live stream interactive dialogue, I do have a shorter version of publication and peer review. But this is a bit more detailed from a talk that I did previously. So let me go to the next slide, if it'll let me. So what I'm going to cover kind of a little bit is the actual process of peer review. There are various types of publications, and people can get lost in regards to the types of publications, what they mean, the purpose of them, what they do. And I'll probably touch just a little bit on impact factor and how that plays a role in the whole world of science. So in peer review, essentially what we're looking at, it's where you've done some work, and it's evaluation of whether it's scientific, academic, professional work by others that are in the same field. So other people in the same field will actually critique your stuff and go through and look, and they're the ones that kind of run you through a rigorous questioning type of process where you essentially have to kind of defend your data. So I won't, let's see, I'm going to hop over to the screen here. So essentially this peer review process, you start out with an idea. You're like, okay, I have this idea. It might be a hypothesis. Perhaps you want to reinforce a theory. You go through and you have essentially an idea. Then what you do is you do your research. You go through whether it's experimentation, whether it's a literature review, you just go and you start working to figure out what the answers are associated with your idea. Then you write and you have your manuscript. And this is your proposed article for a particular journal. You send it to the editor. Now, the editor will then have 3 to 5 experts in the field kind of read through it, and then they'll usually give you notes associated with various questions they have. It could be in relation to your data, the experimental methods that you had. Why did you pick this method over another one? This other method might be more accurate. And they might ask you to do additional experimentation. And then after that, they'll either reject it outright if it's just so incredibly wrong, they may not even give you notes and reject it outright, or they may give you notes for you to improve upon and expand upon. And then once you satisfy their questions, then it's allowed for publication. So I'm going to skip to, you can't see that so well. So this might be a bit harder to see, but this essentially is the process. And you can look this up on Elsevier. They have their own process that they go through, and it's pretty rigorous. So you submit your work here. Now, basic criteria is, do you have correct references? Are you utilizing the references in a way that's appropriate? Or are you citing somebody else's work that has nothing to do with what you're talking about? So they even check for that. Basic science, is your science completely wrong? If so, they just return it and they'll likely reject it. If not, you're like, yay, you understand stuff. Now we got to go through the chief editor. They read through it and they're like, okay, this is pretty interesting. I like this. Then it gets accepted for peer review. So you have a couple of reviewers. They'll read through it, and then they'll pass their notes along. They'll have another peer review and they say, yes, we like this, and it can go on forward. But maybe you might have another, they might be like, no, I don't agree with this. I think we should reject it. They might call in another reviewer, but they'll all give feedback to the editor. There'll be another reviewer that just looks at your English, your grammar, your language, how well you write, and then they'll have notes associated to it. Then they shuffle all those notes back to this author. Now, for my particular paper, they submitted this paper. I'm a co-author on this past summer. The emails that we got back, we got about 4 emails back, and each one of a total of all the notes probably took like 10 scrolls through. So there are a lot of notes they had to go through and be able to defend and answer. So then you get your second review. Did you answer their questions? Or did you satisfy the experimental, their questions in regards to your experimental process? Did you satisfy their any kind of questions they have? Did you revise any particular misleading type of dialogue? And then it gets accepted for publication. So just to give you guys a bit of a framework, we submitted this paper last summer. It just got accepted for publication last month. I don't know when it's going to be published, but I had graduated last May. So a lot of the post experiments that they had to do in relation to this publication was without me. So that's still additional work that you have to get through. And a lot of people don't realize that. All right, so let's talk about the types of peer review. We have single blind, double blind, and open. The most common is single blind. The reviewer is anonymous, and this kind of allows impartial decisions. Authors may have concerns in regards to reviewers that delay publication in order to publish first. So some of the concerns are, if you have an author, if they know who the author is, all right, and you don't know who your reviewer is, there are some dirty players in the world of science that may try to delay your publication because perhaps they're working on the same stuff. Reviewers may use anonymity as justification for being overly critical, or harsh. So you can also have reviewers, if they know who the author is, they might be, they might have their own bias. And that's a real thing that happens. That's not, scientists are not immune to bias. They're not supposed to be. But that's one thing about single blind. The reviewers are not anonymous. Was there a question? I thought I heard somebody. No? Okay. Can you guys still hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So the next one is double blind. The reviewers and the authors are anonymous. And some people prefer this because that way you don't have the potential bias of somebody trying to take your work, or somebody trying to be harsh on purpose, because that can still happen. So the author's anonymity also prevents bias, and the content is considered over the prestige of the author. So, you know, if you happen to be the one who had Stephen Hawking's paper he just sent for publication a few weeks before he passed away, if you don't know that it's Stephen Hawking's paper, you know, that you're more likely to, you know, be level-headed and not go, oh my gosh, I can't find anything wrong with this because it's Stephen Hawking, especially if you're like fangirling like I would, being able to like peer review Stephen Hawking's work. And also that's probably a little bit intimidating too. So if both authors and reviewers are anonymous, that's kind of helpful. But reviewers can still identify authors sometimes through writing style, subject matter, and self-citation. All right, so open review. This is believed to be the best to prevent malicious comments, plagiarism, pushing agendas. It encourages open and honest reviewing, but some see it as a less honest process where politeness or fear of retribution causes a reviewer to withhold criticism. So there's no 100% perfect answer when it comes to peer review, but you know, they do try, and you do have multiple reviewers, not just one. And for that reason, if you had a single reviewer, that would be a problem because then, you know, you would have a bit of bias there. All right, so in regards to actual articles, all right, articles can be transferred. So for instance, the publication we put in this summer was for nanoletters. And the editor can sit there and say, you know, this may not be as appropriate for nanoletters, but it would be pretty good in theranostics. We would like to have this article in theranostics. And if you agree, then all you have to do is satisfy those reviewers for your paper, and they'll put it in theranostics. If you don't agree and you're like, no, we really want it in nanoletters, or we really want it in this other journal here, then you're going to have to go through an entirely separate or second peer review process. There's heavy, heavy scrutiny. They pick it through like a fine tooth comb. Like I said, 10 scrolls to get through all the notes. And it was quite intimidating. I actually called my former lab mates. I'm like, you guys gonna be okay with this? So it's heavy, heavy scrutiny. And you have to defend your data. You have to be able to have your data hold up. And if somebody says this isn't substantial, then you have to do more experiments until it does hold up. It's not for thin-skinned people. There are some people. Yes.
Sorry, you said I should watch for questions. You have one from
Yes,
Jim,
absolutely.
You have one from Jim B. He says, "Nanoletters?" ? There you go.
Yeah. Nanoletters is a journal because I used to do research in nanoparticle technology. And what we were developing was a breast cancer test that used nanoparticles in conjunction with 3D printed technology with gold-coated slides that were modified with a polymer to where it could catch exosomes. Exosomes are released by cancer cells. They're like little teeny tiny vesicles. They're packages that carry proteins as well as genetic coding. And other healthy cells can actually take up or uptake these packages, these exosomes, and that contributes to cancer metastasis. So we were developing, we essentially developed a test, basically a micro device to where we would be able to collect a sample from a person and be able to detect whether or not they had cancerous exosomes. We weren't looking for cells. We were looking for the means of a cancer spreading. And so this would be, this is essentially a higher gold standard test than what they have currently in the hospitals because it doesn't detect a cell. It detects the means that a cancer spreads. So you might have a couple of cancer cells in your body that's kind of hidden from detection. But if you're able to take a blood sample and find exosomes in somebody's blood, then not only does that mean they have that cancer, it's not completely gone. It's also trying to spread. So that's kind of what the theory was behind that. In generating this test was to spin it down, collect, like super ultra centrifuge, spin it down, collect the exosomes, inject it into our multi wells. We would have several wells there, and then the exosomes would attach to our polymer coated gold slides. Then we blast it with nanoparticles that are coated in antibodies that attach to the antigens expressed on the exosomes, because they have antigens on the outside. And then we could detect it through Raman spectroscopy, through plasma and resonance. And then we could also see it through dark field microscopy. And we can also use fluorescence, because exosomes can be dyed to glow green in fluorescence. So it wasn't accepted for nanoletters, but it was accepted for theranostics, which uses also nanoparticle type of research. And this was, for breast cancer. And we looked at MCF7 as one of the models for that, for the high expression it has. I believe it's CD63 is the antigen on that. So yes, I hope that answered your question. I may have just talked a lot.
No, that was actually really great information. That's really awesome. You were involved in a project like that, Mel. That's freaking sweet.
Indeed.
It's pretty cool. Nanoparticles. And then later I got into computational chemistry and learned how to use molecular orbital environment software, and worked with the LPA2 receptor with crystal structures, which is a lot of fun. So that was kind of fun. So yes. So I guess back to my list here. So peer review is not for thin skins. A lot of funding rides on how many publications you have. So if you're not able to publish, nobody's going to give you money, because that means you're not able to get any journals to take your work seriously. One thing you don't want is retraction. If you have to have a paper retracted because somebody else has come out and said, that's a bunch of crap. And that usually happens from bad experiments or misinterpretation of data, or even falsification of data. If you falsify data, especially in the US, and you're accepting government funds, that's considered fraud, because government money, they dole out that money based on data from previous publications. So if you've managed to get funding based on work that you've done previously, and you have a retraction because you falsified data, that could mean jail. And also high quality journals, in regards to getting published in one of those, they're pretty rigorous. So your data has to be very, very sound. It's best if you have multiple means of testing. And usually you have to have partners from different universities to be able to run experiments for you. That gives you a bit more clout. So getting in the more prestigious journals is a bit more difficult. So I think that's just a sum up of what I just talked about. All right, so I'm going to touch really briefly on the difference between research papers and review papers, because people get this mixed up a lot. I'll have people send me a review paper, and it'll be a review paper about cancer. I'm like, yeah, a review paper about cancer, like breast cancer, is essentially taking all the latest information they have about breast cancer and putting it together. Okay, so they're reading other people's work. They're looking for an answer to a particular question. Sometimes, and more oftentimes than not, a review paper generates brand new questions. Like, for instance, well, we wanted to try to find the answer for this particular question, and we weren't able to find it, which means we need to do more research, actual research papers. And that's like the original work with experiments, with analysis of data. That's where research papers are different from review papers. Was there a question?
I don't believe so.
I saw one.
Okay. I will say review papers are very, very, very good, especially for medical doctors who don't have time to read every single individual research paper that's associated with their particular line of work. So A review paper kind of is a bit of a cheat sheet for a doctor because it will take all of the current literature available associated with a particular disease. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop to kind of sit there and read through it and see what's substantial and what's not. And it also kind of assess the effectiveness of different types of medication. So you can have meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is quite useful. So just kind of sum up research. You have a scientific method format in regards to that paper. You're going to have your abstract. You're going to have in that, you're going to have the question that they're trying to answer and what they think the answer is. That's your hypothesis. Then they're going to have their methods and their experimentation. There, you'll see everything that they did in regards to experiments. Then they're going to have their data, which is their results. Then they're going to have conclusions, and then they're going to have a discussion. So it literally follows the scientific method. Yes.
Mel, do you guys, in what you do you have the equivalent of what we call letters?
Yeah, I think, yeah, we did. I'm not in breast cancer research anymore, but yes, we had like letters.
Okay.
Nano letters was one of them. Yeah.
Do you want to explain them, or you want to wait for me to explain them?
Oh, go ahead. You go ahead. I've been talking a lot.
Okay. Well, letters, from what I do, in geology and stuff like that, letters are kind of just like, you got to be careful with them because they're basically just to alert you to what the active research is. That's really their purpose. They're not really a full-blown peer-reviewed paper and all that stuff. I don't know if it was different from what you used to do or not.
Well, it is a bit different. There's like heavy peer review with
the
some of the letters.
Our letters are usually minimal, and we also have we can submit just abstracts, and I'll cover that later. But yeah, so they're a little more lenient. Letters are a little more open, and like I said, it's just to show you what the active research is. Basically, I've never written one, but I've read a few of them, so I always submit full papers.
Yes. I think it depends on the field. Letters can vary depending on the field.
I just got to jump in and say this real quick. The equivalent to peer review when you work in engineering, such as the particular field of mechanical engineering that I do, it's called destructive test engineering. We just go ahead and build it and find out.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
What happens now?
Oh, you wouldn't imagine some of the ways that you find out a way to break something just to make sure that it's not going to break.
That's fantastic.
Between two concrete pillars and driving into it with a forklift and smashing it into the ground inside of an airplane hangar with.
Don't you guys just make concrete cylinders and test those, or is it just more fun to run things into walls?
Well, there are certain processes where you're going to go through non-destructive testing, and there is a much more scientific method involved as far as ensuring that there aren't voids in materials, things of that nature. But at a certain point in time, sometimes you really just have to break it. So,
see, that just sounds fun. I want to be the person that breaks the stuff.
Test engineering is a lot of fun. There was a former aircraft manufacturer here in Denver that I used to work for, and it's one of those jobs that has to take place at night, because if there are other people in the building, because it's a day shift type thing, they're probably never going to want to return to work after they hear what you're doing.
Wow.
Trying to figure out how to simulate test crashing a solid composite aircraft indoors. It's pretty loud.
I bet.
And it consumes a lot of energy, so
yeah,
you need that transformer free. But
awesome.
Back to you guys. Sorry, just had to jump in with the differences of engineering peer reviews. Break it.
RSC said something. I think he thought he was joking. He said, so geology papers just have a bunch of pictures, and it's funny that he says that because the one I submitted actually has 34 in it.
Here's my Instagram. Peer review that, please.
Well, no,
my Instagram of all my pictures.
Well, we do that so because I'll get into it when you're done, Mel. Why we do?
Well,
that.
hold on, Stephen. I've got to ask. Like I say, my dad was a geologist, so I've just got to wonder how many times in your papers do you have a picture of a rock hammer sitting next to something?
Actually, probably about 80% of the time. But since they're not
sounds about right
sizes, I try to use really obscure things like dollar coins, or I actually do have bar scales now. But yeah, because they vary in size so much that I try to avoid it. But I think this one I think there's there's 8 rock hammers in it. So
nice.
But you got to give the length of the rock hammer if you do that. So
yeah,
it's a key instrument.
Oh, it is. It is. And for some reason, I can't see the chat anymore. Oh well, I don't know where it went. It ran away.
They're tired of all this scary peer review stuff, man. It's frightening.
It's almost like when you do science for a living, people are going to judge your work and make sure that you aren't lying.
Well, not only that, but to make sure it's relevant. I mean, I mean, just because you put it on paper doesn't make it a reality. Well, some people think it does, but so yeah, I'm really annoyed about this chat. I can't see the chat now.
Well, if do you mean in the Hangout? Because I had to kill the screen share so that Mel could
no,
present.
I can see it on this. Well, I can see it on YouTube. It's still showing up on YouTube, but when you have it open on your desktop, it flows like in real time. That part is missing.
But what about use the link to the pop out chat? It's in the private chat. You can pop that up and it'll be just the chat. You can put it anywhere you like.
I can't do it for some reason. I'm not going to waste too much time messing with it now. I'll figure it out another time.
Okay.
Just if anyone
I'm
sees any
finished.
questions anyone has, let me know.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So I kind of already went over a little bit of review papers. It summarizes concepts. So it's really good if you're trying to brush up on a particular field. You can find review papers associated with a particular field. It summarizes previous work. Meta-analysis is fantastic for that. There was a meta-analysis done to look at the autism vaccines type of thing. I think it was over like 10 million children. I think was the total. I believe it was 10 million children. I can't pull that right off the top of my head, but they did a meta-analysis on all of the work associated with vaccines and autism, and they saw there's no correlation. Review papers also give you possible directions of research. Like I said, it kind of can bring forward more questions if a person or a group are trying to find an answer to a particular question and they analyze all of the current research and they still don't have the answer. Like, okay, well, I guess we need to jump in on this and see if we can find some answers. And then also common in medical journals, quick study. Okay. I need to jump back. Okay. This is a lot of words, so I won't make you guys read this. I just kind of already gone through. One thing you got to keep in mind is review article is not original research. It's just summaries, but they're still useful. They should not be exempt from scrutiny just because they're explaining others' research. Checking the journal that a review paper is published in can help weed out potentially misleading review papers. And though reviews are good resources, it's important to consider the original research if it references by looking at the study, the method, sample size, and conflicts of interest. So you still have to kind of play by the rules in regards to scrutinizing whether or not a review paper is valid. Look at the studies that they cite, look at the studies that they pick apart, and check to see, if it's bad science or good science. You still got to kind of do that. So I'm going to talk briefly about the impact factor. And what is an impact factor? It kind of shows how often an article from a particular journal gets cited. So if you get like in Nature, if you get like cited in Nature, you get cited into a particular high impact journal, more than likely you're going to get cited lots and lots of times. So if you use Google Scholar and you're looking for a paper and you're like, oh, hey, look, here's a paper on, you know, I don't know, the brain. You know, I'm looking to tell the difference. Like I hear this a lot, especially on social media, men's brains versus women's brains. I'm like, okay, great. You'll go, somebody will give me a paper and like nobody's cited it. You know, and then I'll look at the study and I'm like, you know, I just did a quick Google Scholar. I went and found your paper. Nobody cited this. I'm looking at the data. It's like a sample size of 2, you know, and their methods are ridiculous. And it was published in a very low impact factor journal. The impact factor, academics and grant givers use it to kind of figure out where they want to put their publications. So here's a little bit of math. In this regard, A is equal to the number of times articles are published in 2015 and 2016, and were cited in 2017. Okay, so all of the number of times articles published in 2015 and 2016 were cited in 2017. B is the total number of citable items published in 2015 and 2016. You divide those numbers, you get the 2017 impact factor. So what does that look like? So this is from JCR Insights from ThompsonRouters.com. They're the ones that kind of do the impact factor numbers. So if we look, we have the impact factor is the red here, and the total sites is 1,000. So if you publish in Nature, you're going to get, you know, you're going to get cited quite a few times. But Nature has so many citable things, the impact factor kind of suffers on it. But look at this. Cancer Journal for Clinicians. Okay, Cancer Journal for Clinicians. You're going to get way more, the impact factor is like way higher because of the fact that, you know, this is, I mean, it's cancer. They're constantly publishing stuff all the time. So let's see these numbers here. All right. So this is kind of the breakdown of the numbers. So their impact factor is freaking huge. All right. So Nature has got like 671,000 total sites, and their impact factor is 40. So if you publish in Nature, you're more than likely going to get cited about 40 times. If you publish in this Cancer Journal for Clinicians, you're going to have an impact factor. It's likely you're going to be cited 187 times. Because there's so much in the way of citable stuff because cancer's constantly going. Let's see. Oh, wrong way. Let me see. This way. All right. Now, something that we need to keep in mind. Just because you publish in a high impact factor journal does not mean you will get cited. All right. So you have to keep that in mind. The calculations from JIF is a bit opaque. They're not 100% transparent in the way that they come up with the citable items, with the number of citations. They're not entirely transparent. And there's been a lot of articles in regards to that coming out in that some people kind of call a little bit of BS with it. The number of citations affects the score, and the citation distributions, from what they found in a few articles that I've read, I can link you to them, is that they're so skewed that up to 75% of the articles in any given journal had lower citation counts than the journal's average number. So trying to use this impact factor to forecast the impact of any particular paper is close to guesswork. And that's Science Mag had an article on that. So if you publish in a prestigious journal, you get some kind of cred, but the numbers can be misleading because you can have 75% of the articles have a lower citation count than the average number. And there's heavy criticism in regards to the impact factor. So where does that leave us? That is everything. Peer review is necessary and rigorous. There's research papers and there are review papers. Impact factor, it's still what's used, but it's not necessarily something that's going to guarantee you're going to get lots of citations. I think the impact factor of theranostics for the one that we're getting published in is 8. So maybe 8 people Well, it's not nature. It's nothing, or cancer for clinicians or anything like that. Maybe 8 people will cite us, but there's no guarantee that that'll happen. So that is all I have got with that.
Excellent.
That was very
Whose
informative.
microwave was that?
Well, if it was Andy, it may not have been a microwave at all.
That's true.
That may be AC hum, and we may have some pictures of interesting things for later shows.
Yay!
Yay.
You okay, Andy?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to find a paper that I wanted to share, but I can't seem to locate it. So,
well, I can babble for a little bit because I wanted to do
yes. Steve, tell us about
absolutely.
your peer review process and all the stuff that you wanted to talk about.
Mel, comes all prepared with slides and stuff, and I'm just gonna babble. But just so everybody knows, because a couple of people asked this, no, I do not have a PhD. I only have a bachelor's degree. I do have a professional license, though. But anyone can, if your research is sound, you can publish. But it's hard. So what I do, my kind of self-adopted specialty is stratigraphy and structural geology. So I only publish, basically I'm one of those people who looks at rocks and goes, ooh, okay, I'm not going to lie, that's what I do. And it's very observational based, not very experimental. That's why we have a lot of pictures in our papers. You got to give GPS coordinates and all that stuff so others can go look and find, because I write papers on what's called lithostratigraphy. And there's very few of us on this continent, and there's only about 5 of us that do the Lake Superior region. So when I get something reviewed, I know who my reviewers are. There's no question about it. So they don't even try to hide it. It's open. But I only publish in closed journals. There's closed and open, different type of open than what Mel was talking about. I prefer the closed anyway. I fund my own stuff. I don't have grant money. And I actually do have, fortunately, one of my old professors when I was at Illinois State, he kind of still helps me. And he's semi-retired. So he looks over my stuff too, and he does research in the area. So, but this, this most recent paper was on a sedimentary assemblage of rocks in the UP and Wisconsin. I won't bore you too much of the details, but lithostratigraphy is basically how we divide rocks into formations and other subunits like members and stuff based on the physical characteristics of the rocks. It has nothing to do with about the fossils they contain. It has nothing to do about the age of the rocks and all that. And the reason for that is because in lithostratigraphy, like anyone has to be able to identify the formation. That's a basic rock unit. So, if you've got some drillers out there looking for something, they're not going to know one fossil from another, and there's no way in the field to date a rock. So lithostratigraphy sticks with just the physical characteristics of the rocks. And in this last paper I had, there were, like Mel said, it goes to the editors and all that, but the 3 reviewers that ended up having it, I didn't recognize the one guy's name. The other 2 I know. As a matter of fact, I see one of them every year in May. But the other guy I didn't recognize, and he actually suggested my paper be rejected. Yet the other 2 people who have been doing work in the area for like 40 years thought it just needed major revisions. But the guy that rejected it outright, so you don't have to agree. My point of this ramble is you don't have to agree with peer reviewers. You can call them out. This guy was a geophysicist. And the thing with most geophysicists is they have a physics background, not a geology background. So his reason for wanting to reject my paper is because I didn't take the dates of certain lava units into account, but he missed the whole point of what I was trying to do. I wasn't even concerned with those rocks. And like I said, the dates they're irrelevant. So I won that argument, surprisingly. So They gave it to somebody else. But this paper finally, like Mel said, sometimes it takes them a while just to look over it. You'll send it to them and submit it, and then like 4 or 5 months goes by, and then all of a sudden you get this random email, and you're like, "What?" Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh crap. But like I said, I have an ex-professor that helps me a lot. So, and the emails back and forth and stuff like that. And one of the guys that reviews my papers, kind of like the granddaddy who kind of defined this stuff, he's an old school guy. He prints it out, marks it up, scans it, and sends it back.
That's great.
Nice.
Yeah. So, but he's a good guy. I'll see him. I'm surprised he hasn't retired yet. But yeah, I mean, peer reviewing or going through the process, like I said, I don't have to worry about the government funding part. So it's a lot easier for me. I don't have the strict time stamps. I'm not worried about where I'm going to get money from or anything. And I just kind of do them at my leisure. But this one, finally, I sent in the final draft. I think it was on Friday. And hopefully they got everything they need. So, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about it. Does anybody has any more questions or anything? Mel covered so much. It went into so much detail. She stole some of my thunder, which is okay because she had slides and I don't.
I don't want to steal. Here, I'll give it back to you. Somebody was saying, I have a sonic screwdriver. I'll give it back to you, Steve. Did you get it? Are you fixed?
Oh, yes. I got it. You got the David Tennant one.
I do. It's River Songs as well, right?
Yes.
It
is the same one.
Yeah.
So
that was fun. Good job on the paper, man. You'll have to send it to us when it gets published.
Well, this is actually the second one I've done with this journal. The first one, they were all like, yeah, this is good. It was kind of weird. It just kind of went, I was kind of like, okay. I mean, it came back with some, there were revisions and everything. But this one, that one guy was just like, I suggest rejection. And we're all like, what? But that was a misunderstanding. So, and, like I said, sometimes you don't have to agree with what a reviewer says, or you need to explain yourself better a lot of the times. I was going to say something else, but my train of thought derailed. I don't even know anymore.
Your train of thought
like
derailed. I saw the comment in the chat as to which doctor was the favorite and all that, and 10 and my brain took off on a tangent. Well, 10 and 11 are basically like Simon and Garfunkel. You have the professional actor who's obviously 10. And then you have the little kid, which is obviously that's where my brain went. So don't worry about tangents.
Okay, that's okay. But my favorite doctor is always going to be Tom. He's the one I grew up with. I'm sorry, it's always going to be Tom.
Me too. Although Eccleston had some serious sarcasm, and you know how I love sarcasm.
Oh yeah.
Yes, stupid apes.
All I got to say, Eccleston was my first doctor. I hadn't even heard of Doctor Who until I know. I grew up on Star Trek and Star Wars and all this other stuff. I didn't even know about Doctor Who until the revamped series. So Eccleston was my first doctor, and I had no idea about the canon or anything. So I was like fresh with that. And so when Eccleston left the show, I was like, what the heck is this? I was like, how do you do that to a person? I was so mad, and I cried and I cried. I'm like,
it's like the shortest doctor ever.
I was like, who does this to people? Who does this? And I hated the BBC, but of course I watched every season after that. It took me maybe 3 episodes. No, it took me 3 episodes to get used to 10. It took me like 2 seasons to get used to Matt Smith, and I never got on with Capaldi until the last season, and I'm like, now I like him.
Mm-hmm. I like Capaldi. I think
it's just hard. It's hard.
So, but yeah, when Mel does a peer review, I take it she has a bigger bank of people that do what she does. I mean, it's kind of awkward when there's only like 5 to a dozen of you and you all know each other. Because if you make a stupid error, that person knows. So, yeah.
Yeah. But it's It was brutal, the notes we got back. And, and I had graduated, so I wasn't even in the lab anymore. I'm like, are you guys going to be able to handle this? Can I help you or something? At the time I was just taking a break, and then I was job hunting, and I'm going, man, I hope they sort out all the notes. They're like, yeah, Mel, we got this. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, you can't have a thin skin and do this.
No.
No. I mean, some of them are pretty brutal sometimes. It's easier if you're just a co-author, though, because then you can kind of hide in the background. I've done that a few times.
Yeah, I was a co-author on this, and I'm not the first author because I was on the project for about 2 years, and then my last semester I hopped over to another lab because I wanted to gain some computational chemistry skills with like Mo with the LPA2 receptor. So I hopped to a different lab, and so but 2 years I spent on that, and working on a few of the cancer research projects they had within that lab. And it was just like, so I'm a co-author. I'm not a first author because, they still had to go back and redo all the notes and stuff. And there were other people. I mean, it was just like, it's hard. It's hard to divvy it up because we all had individual things that we were contributing to the project. I was exclusively in charge of all of the 3D printing stuff. So I was designing the 3D template on top of it. I was working also, conjugating the nanoparticles. I was working in the cell culture. So, I mean, I was exclusively in charge of that, and working to isolate the individual wells so we didn't have cross-contamination. So and since it was academia, we didn't have a lot of money. So I was literally like at Home Depot buying silicone caulk. I needed like black silicone caulk. And so I was mixing it with mineral spirits, trying to get it to where it was moldable. And so that's exactly what I was doing. And so I had like another professor go, do you have the MSDS on it? I'm like, it's freaking silicone from Home Depot. What do you want? And so I had bought, and because I had to let it set because I needed to be able to remove the template so we could do further testing on the gold slide without hurting the polymer coating or actually, hurting the gold on there. We needed to be able to remove the template. So I had to make it watertight for the individual samples where they didn't cross over or bleed into each other to where we could, have multiple patients on one particular thing. So I was just like molding silicone in the lab, putting it on there. I had to buy toy car axles that were 3 millimeters, 3 millimeter diameter, I think is what we were doing, 1.5. But I literally just went on Amazon and bought toy car axles and was putting them in here, with it and letting it set. But my whole bench top looked like a Tim Burton film with like black goo and stuff on this. But we nailed that out of the park. Then we were working with the Raman spec with the gold nanoparticles. So we put our little exosome samples in our wells, and then they would stick. Then we'd have to remove this, wash it off, and put it back on. Then we'd blast it with our nanoparticles. And if it stuck, then that means they had that expression of that antigen on the outside of the exosome. We could see it in dark field microscopy. We could see it on the Raman spec, which is IR. Infrared. And so the gold kind of enhances that signal. You can see it on there. And if we wanted to, then we could dye the exosomes with fluorescent dye and it would glow. So, I mean, that was our mode of trying to determine whether or not there were exosomes. If they had the expression of that antigen, that means it was the MCF7 cancer, and the nanoparticles would attach to it. It'd light it up under the microscope. And then we'd also get the Raman spec signal. So yeah, that's what I did.
There's a lot of science that goes at Home Depot.
I was pleased to hear the Home Depot thing because I still maintain, at least for the type of experimentation done here, between Home Depot and Walmart, that's where I get most of my supplies.
Amazon toy car axles. Who knew? Perfect fit for my 3D printed template. So I can 3D print, man. Anybody need a 3D printer? That would be me. I'm familiar with MakerBot, Tinkercad.
Just remember, kids, if you're going to use gasoline as a solvent and you want it to happen quicker, don't heat it because the fumes will catch first. Just saying.
He's not saying how he knows
reminds
that.
me of being a little kid and putting gasoline in a tiki torch.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really glad that my neighbor ran a tree farm and was able to extinguish me with an industrial hose.
Wow.
I'm joking. It wasn't actually that bad. I just caught the lawn on fire.
Have your eyebrows grown back?
Wow.
Yes, that was like 37 years ago. It's been a while.
Understandable.
Wow. Your parents must have had heart attacks. Like, oh gosh.
Oh,
man.
you know, I was that kid that actually used to get a thank you card and a Christmas card from the ER that I regularly visited while I was growing up.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh, as if any of our parents had calm lives as we were growing up. I don't think so.
No.
The phrase, what's that? Why is it on fire? It's like there was an echo. Anyway.
That's funny.
Wow, we've gone over.
I still
overtime,
even remember
guys.
one time I was up in the Swatch range with my dad and one of the guys that he was working with at the time, Bruce Bryant, and we were running through this. Pardon?
Bruce Banner.
Bruce Bryant. Sorry. We were running through a boulder field trying to escape a lightning storm, and me being the small, slow, little one wasn't able to move quite quick enough. I wasn't struck by lightning, but the rock I was trying to jump off of was struck by lightning, and that was more than enough for me to get quite seriously injured.
Ow. Well, Andy, that's how you become the Hulk, you know, right? Gamma radiation, I forget.
Well, I haven't quite gotten angry enough to become the Hulk yet, but if it does happen, I will make sure that I'm wearing a helmet cam at the very least.
And don't forget stretchable pants.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed.
Spandex.
Oh, well, I think we've just about covered everything for this evening's show, and does anybody else have anything that they want to bring up regarding digging into the bowels of the Earth in order to learn more about our climate history?
I'm good for
Not
now.
that I can think of.
I have some ideas, but I'll save it for later.
Okay.
Okay, well, ideas are always welcome.
Yay.
Okay, if that's about it, then I say we go ahead and wish everyone a good evening, and thanks all for joining us once again for Science Sunday. And I look forward to having you guys around for the remainder of our climate science series. And remember, this is going through Earth Day, so we have a lot more information to cover, and we are going to cover it. So I hope you all enjoyed. And
thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
I had a great time. This was wonderful.
Oh, me too. I learned something every time I hang out with any of you people, and having you all in one place was just great.
I learned about geology today, and I'm terrible at that. That's the section that I usually wander through the local museum, go, yeah, I don't know any of this.
Oh, wait, there's more coming. So be afraid. Be very afraid.
Oh, my.
Oh, goodness.
All right. Well, that being said, I suppose have a good night, everybody, and we will see you next week, either on Sunday or, yes, RSC Monday. Sometimes it happens.
I will be in New Orleans on Sunday, so Monday would probably be easier for me.
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Sunday, we're going to be coming back from up north.
Mm-hmm. North.
So,
yeah,
well, if 50% of the panel is not going to be available, why don't we just plan on, if Monday works out better for both of you, and seeing as how you're 50% of the panel for this particular show, it would probably be
sounds like Monday's it.
To just go with Monday Science again next week.
We're still going to call it Sunday Science, though. We'll do in parentheses, like today's Sunday Science on Monday.
Okay. That works.
Monday. That's
All
cool
right.
with me.
And have fun on movie night, guys. I can't be there.
I will be in New Orleans. So.
All right, we'll do the. We'll miss you, of course, but we'll do your plugs in your absence for you. So fear not.
Indeed.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Night.
Good night. Thanks for having us.
Have a great week, everybody.
Indeed.